Hello, welcome to another video, and today we're going to be looking at some neck pain, not specifically exercises as such. This kind of follows on from the previous videos that I've done, one on knee pain and one on back pain, where I'm just looking at some of the interesting statistics and facts that most people would probably not know about, but they really should know about because it would actually help them to either prevent the problem in the first place or heal themselves if they're currently suffering with it. So I'm just playing video in the background of some basic sort of tests that I do. Mobility tests. There's a scratch test for a shoulder to determine, if there's a problem with the internal rotators that could be associated with neck pain. Obviously, the first one was just a simple neck stretch. This is a shoulder impingement test. So ruling out, because if there's any problems with the shoulder, you're guaranteed to have a problem with the neck. All right, because the same muscle that moves the shoulder is going to move the head. All right, so let's firstly look at some of the, before we come back to these exercises, look at some of the interesting stats relating to the neck. Because what you'll find is I've broken this into three parts, specifically the neck and things that are associated with causing the problem. Part two, sort of looking at jaw-related TMJ type of problems, because that's very much associated with neck pain, and obviously probably a symptom of it, but it's not necessarily related to musculoskeletal things, migraines. So, because a lot of these, someone could have all three of these things at the same time, which is not uncommon, especially in females, as we'll look into. So, firstly, how prevalent is the neck pain? So, basically, like the stats have shown that, if I'm using the US as an example, there's, the prevalence is about 30% among adults, with nearly 50% of those showing that they'll continue to experience some degree of chronic neck pain or frequent occurrences. So that's a fairly high statistic that you'd really want to know how to prevent it, and obviously there's a lot of people already got it, and usually what they're doing is just applying like stretches like I did at the start here, basically just trying to stretch things because it makes them feel good, but when it's actually related to a lot more other things, usually stability, posture and strength, where stretching doesn't change any of that. So one of the biggest causes, however, is mobile phones. Used to be computers and sitting, but the mobile phones have sort of accelerated the neck pain prevalence, especially among younger people. So used to see a lot of things more in older people, but now it's actually younger people who I see quite a lot of children actually. So, but basically one of these interesting stats is that found that 77% of the world's population has their own phone, and many studies have been done to see the correlation between phones and with neck pain. And what they found is that with children and adolescents, that were spending 5 to 7 hours a day with their head flexed over. So now flexed over head is a big trouble to the cervical spine, especially when you're doing it for a lot of time like that, because that's what leads to forward head posture. Now forward head posture basically means that your head's moved forward of its ideal position, where a normal head would weigh about 10 to 14 pounds in a neutral spine, but as the laws of physics dictate, it creates a lever when it moves forward, so then the head actually weighs more. So in a study where they've actually measured this, they found a 15-degree forward head was 27 pound, a 30-degree head was 40 pound, 45-degree head was nearly 50 pound, and a 60-degree change was 60 pound, which is a significant rise in how much tension the muscles that support the neck are going to have to do in order just to hold your head up. All right, so that's where, like if I'm moving through these stretches and tests here, I want to be looking at things like thoracic extension. So this is a thoracic extension test, and because I'm on the floor, and if I've got my head positioned correctly, as Dylan does, I can make sure that my thoracic spine is able to still extend, which you'll quite often find with a forward head posture it does not, because what you would find is this, firstly his head would have a lot bigger angle in it, so basically his eyes would be looking that way, and we'd sometimes have to base up their head underneath there, but because he's positioned well and he doesn't have neck problem either, he can do this test. Now The reason we're doing the thoracic one is because when the arms get to probably about there, and if he's got a hunch normally, he won't be able to get his arms any further unless he severely arches his back. But if we've instructed him to keep his back flat on the ground there, he'll basically get stuck, and he'll feel like his shoulders are getting like really, really, really tight, when all along it's actually the thoracic spine, because it no longer extends. All right, and that's what puts a lot of pressure onto the head and neck. And as you'll see in a second, it actually puts a lot of pressure into the jaw. All right, so TMJ and jaw pain, basically there's a 70% correlation with a forward head posture and a jaw that's pushed back. All right, so that's your bottom jaw being pushed backwards. All right, so a study by the New England Journal of Medicine found that 40 to 75% of adults in the US report at least one sign of TMJ disorder. Now that's massive. That's more than the neck pain. And if you sort of correlate that with the forward head posture, that's probably going to lead before maybe neck pain at times. All right, so teeth grinding is a real common source of TMJ pain, responsible for a lot of sleep disorders. The TMJ itself is an extremely strong muscle, and it's actually found to be the second strongest muscle in the body. The strongest muscle is actually the tongue, and the tongue is playing a big role with the TMJ to keep that jaw aligned. So the TMJ is the only two joints that function together as a single unit. All right, so there's like two joints there, but they're actually doing the same thing, which is quite unusual. Now, when you're teeth grinding, that's basically going to start cracking your teeth. As much as you're going to get massive jaw pain and neck pain, you're going to most likely crack your teeth, right? So, and then to be able to crack the teeth, considering how strong they are, because tooth enamel is the hardest substance in the human body. All right, so for it to be able to do that, you have to be clenching pretty hard. So clenching and grinding can exert up to 300 pounds of force per square inch to your teeth, your cranium, your ligaments, your cartilage, and the disc within the TMJ. So now you can see how everything with the neck problems closely related to the jaw problems. You know, which one comes first is hard to say. Now, there's a lot of other reasons for TMJ, obviously stress, so that's a psychological thing, not necessarily a musculoskeletal problem as such. So it can be the two working together to create a perfect storm. All right, so one of the things that I'm always working on, again, the thoracic is another thoracic mobility test, because nearly all the time that you'll find neck problem, you're going to find this huge stiffness in the thoracic spine. It's basically locked itself up and fusing the rib cage together. So now that's why it's hard for people with neck pain to turn around. Right? So they can't really turn their head very well because they're so jammed up in their thoracic region. All right. So this is the main part I would be looking for with this thoracic rotation test, because this brings into play the scapula. Now the scapula has a huge role to play in what's going on with the shoulder, but also with the neck. And you'll find that nearly all the times that we have a neck problem, there's a scapular problem behind it. All right, so the thoracic is definitely an area, but the scapula sits on this thoracic, so they're basically combining to create that perfect problem. All right, so working on mobilizing it and then eventually strengthening it. We'll look at some of those exercises in a second. But one of the things that follows on from the neck and the jaw problems is also the migraine problem. So now statistics show 1 in 7 people will suffer with migraines, with women 3 times as likely as men to have regular episodes. A lot of this has to do, apart from the postural problems and stress and all those things, a lot of it, the reason for the females is the massive fluctuations with the hormones, especially falling estrogen levels. They're often the trigger of the worst migraines. So that happens at the end of the menstrual cycle, and often a lot with premenopausal women who are also going through massive hormonal changes. So it's not the only thing, but it could be the one thing that tips you over the edge. Right? So you could have a bit of stress, poor posture, clenching your jaw, but it's not quite enough to bring on the migraine. But then you get this hormonal fluctuation, and that's what tips you over, pushes you off the cliff. All right. So what it means is, you can't necessarily change a hormonal situation, but you can definitely change your posture and improving, mobility and things like that. And working on your strength and improving scapular stability, all those different things. So, I can have a quick look at a few exercises, but it's impossible for me to give you the exact blueprint because everyone's so unique. That's why I have so many different videos on forward air posture and specific things, because they have specific exercises for their problem. All right, so I hope this video just gives you a bit of information that you may not have known. By all means, check out other videos on my channel that relate to neck problems. I get a lot of questions about it. And it's very difficult because as you can see here, it can branch off into many different parts. And that's not even looking at how the lumbar spine and the pelvis, because that also plays a position as well, a part in creating it. But if you can start with the simple things and get a control of them, you can really make a huge difference and get rid of your pain or prevent it if you haven't got it already. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed that video, and we'll see you next time.